the Library of Congress invited Lizzo to check out its flute collection. I don't know how many flutes they have, but it's a lot. And she got to play James Madison's 200-year-old crystal flute.
Is this a euphemism?
No, no, it really happened. I don't know if it's funny, but it's awesome.
See, that right there, Dave, you just did the thing. So I'm taking this stand-up comedy class at the Comedy Spot, and we just finished week 3. And one of the things that we were learning in the stand-up class is like to write down things that you're amused by, things that happen to you. But the first rule of figuring out whether or not to include it in your stand-up bit is if there's no punchline, which Dave just provided for us, then it's just an observation. And so observations can be funny, but you got to figure out what the punchline is. So you set it up, and then Dave came right in with like, is that a euphemism? Right. And then now we're all laughing because you set it up perfectly.
Because James Madison, now we're all thinking about James Madison's 200-year-old crystal piece.
200-year-old crystal flute.
Yeah.
First, why a crystal flute? I don't know.
That's incredible. And they all had flutes? Like everyone had flutes back then?
I mean, there was no television or internet, Dave. Like,
that's amazing.
You gotta find some way to entertain yourself. I mean, I was about to say life was long, but the life expectancy was like
it's not
40 years. It's like 38 years or something. So life actually wasn't that long, and it was very stressful, and there were lots of things to tend to. But in your rare downtime, you needed some hobbies.
A flautist a day keeps the doctor away.
So not only is it James Madison's crystal flute, but it has never been heard, recorded, or played before while it's been in their collection. So Lizzo is the first person to make, a recording and noise from this apparently very famous crystal flute.
This is so weird. But I'm dying to read more on this. Flo, can I hear more about this comedy class of yours you're in? Because we've always thought you to be funny. Like, why do you need to formalize?
I don't know if people know, but I really, really, really love stand-up comedy. Like, it is the thing that I can most, like, some people watch reruns of The Golden Girls because it's just very comforting to them, and it's also a really great show. But for me, I don't watch reruns of shows. I watch stand-up comedy. There's something about the routine of it that is just very soothing to my brain. And I also like the personality and the way that the performance of stand-up is done. And so I've realized, like, just going through Netflix, like, I have watched most of HBO's, most of Netflix, most of Hulu, like any stand-up that exists. I'm really like tapped into it. So then I started thinking, and I started realizing as I got more tapped into it, I was like taking notes of things that were funny and kind of doing like organically some of the things I'm now learning in the class you're supposed to do if you're doing stand-up. So I was like, well, let me try, right? Like, I'm an adult. I think we should have more play though in our lives. I think we should still explore things and not be afraid to be terrible at something. We used to do that all the time as a kid, like just try things and be like, this sucks, or I'm
not good at this, but it's fun.
But I tried it, right? So I have been really trying to just like capture and keep some of that in my life. So I was like, well, let me try a stand-up comedy class. And I'm really enjoying it. There are 10 of us in the class. One of actually Dave, a friend of his is our instructor. And so each week we have, a little lecture portion, and then we've been working up to 5 minutes of material for our comedy showcase next Thursday, which is open to the public. I'm terrified.
Oh my God, love it. So, yeah, your teacher is she was the first like friend I had when I moved into Sacramento like 10 years ago, I think.
Oh, she was your Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, Shahara Hyatt, comedian, was my Mark Zuckerberg. Yes.
For those of you who didn't join Facebook like super early on, when you originally joined Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg was your first friend.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Nice.
We're dating ourselves though by saying we were around at the beginning of Flo, and you and I were Big Ten schools. We were among the first adopters.
Yep. I've been on Facebook since 2004.
Same. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I don't like to talk about it.
Yeah. Some of those old memories pop up and I'm like, oh, you can't even this is old.
Like, I don't want this on my feed anymore. I need to get rid of this. Burn my computer.
Wow.
So
I use that as an opportunity to call embarrassing things I've said from the past. I'm like, oh, that didn't age well. Just gonna delete that.
Yeah.
I think that our younger iterations of ourselves, if my Facebook memories are any indicator, are always going to embarrass us. Just always. I can't wait to, 45-year-old me looking back at me now and just like, wow, you sucked.
I am in constant competition with my 18-year-old self. So every year, right around my birthday, I tell her off and drag her and just remind her that I'm so much better than she is. It's basically like a gangster rap plus Beyonce album that I directed myself at the beginning of every new birthday year of just you suck.
Just a diss
Never
track
gonna
to
be
yourself.
Yeah, I distract myself for sure.
Never gonna be. That's a bit of a cell phone, but well, shall we start this show? We do have a couple things to cover today, and I'm excited for it. All right.
Voices, the things they said. Voices, some from those dead. All the voices heard. Voices, things we say. Voices, they're in your head. All the voices heard.
Oh, hello, everyone. You have Kempa.
And Flo.
And Michelle.
Yay!
All right. No Skylar or Shannon. I was almost mixing their names up there today. They will be back. They will be back soon. But very excited to have our new favorite co-host, Michelle. That's 2 out of 3 episodes now since we've come back. So thank you for coming on today.
Yeah.
Thank you for having
you, Michelle.
It's so fun.
Yeah. And we're doing a new thing where we actually do our little Patreon pitch at the beginning. So, folks, if you are not yet a patron, please become one. Patreon.com/VoicesRiverCity. Go there, and for as little as $5 a month, you can get all these cool extra things. We're going to be doing patron-only recordings now that we're back, as well as on occasion patron-only hangouts. We will be having a patron-only hangout on the second Friday of October. That will be October 14th. Details forthcoming, but they will be behind the Patreon wall. So you better become a patron, folks. All of that is to say, we're just trying to keep doing what we're doing, and we wanna give you a good show. So please support us if you like what we're doing. On to the news of the day. We got a couple stories we want to cover today, but number one, I think, would be very fun to talk about a little city council member from a little district called District 1 in northern Sacramento. This would be Angelique Ashby. She held a little bit of a press conference on Tuesday, September 27th, and we wanted to talk about what she's basically trying to push forward here. So, Michelle, can you give us some background on this?
Yeah, I can do that. So last week, a man described as either mentally ill or intoxicated allegedly made obscene gestures towards some kids near Sutter Middle School. He was arrested. He has been described in the news as unhoused or possibly unhoused. And this has set off, or rather given folks a platform and an opportunity to talk about removing homeless folks from near schools. Angelique and Jeff Harris, council member from District 3, where Sutter Middle School is, at least until redistricting takes effect, did a little press conference where they announced that they want to add schools and childcare centers as critical infrastructure and part of the critical infrastructure ordinance. So folks would not be able to camp within 500 feet of them. Now, I don't know that this would have stopped any obscene gestures at children to have camps not nearby, but that is what they're headed at. So I think their plan is to vote on this addition to the critical infrastructure ordinance sometime in mid-October.
Yes.
Okay. Now there's a few interesting things happening here. Ashby and Harris, who you referenced, the two council members, they are probably the two most conservative council members up there. Sean Loloee perhaps gives them a run for their money. They are holding this press conference in direct response, it appears, to this thing that happened. And it seems to me that what they're doing is equating this single man's behavior this day with everyone included in the unhoused community in Sacramento. The last point in time count, they found 4,444 people living unsheltered. And it seems like they're using this one man to basically criminalize the other 4,443 people, right? Because he didn't go to get arrested because he was camping, right? He got arrested because he was doing actual crimes that we already have in the books.
Right. So yeah, this was a policy proposal looking for a premise, right? They've wanted to do this for a long time, and this is a political window of opportunity to be able to get people riled up, because we all want our kids to be protected. No one wants people, making obscene gestures at kids, or cursing them out or exposing them, in that way and targeting them in that way. We want our kids to be safe. And so this is a great opportunity to prey on that desire and then do a pivot between
P-R-E-Y, folks.
Yes, prey, P-R-E-Y, on that opportunity, and then do a pivot to a thing that you want to do that is loosely but not fully connected. And I think this is why we sometimes talk about a thing, a very wonky thing called a logic model, because it requires you to think through things that might be related, but to actually say, does this cause this? Is this the appropriate investment to be able to get this outcome? And I think this fails the basic logic model, continuity and causation clause of does removing camps stop someone from committing a crime that, as Dave said, is already on the books? And does it address the underlying challenge that caused that in the first place? And I don't think the camp is what caused a person to do that.
No. And I would say the vast majority of people who harm kids live inside, but we don't bulldoze houses 500 feet from a school because, a housed person made obscene gestures at a kid.
Right.
It doesn't pass the logic muster, Flo. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. I remember back when I was working at a local paper here years ago, and there were some arsons going on, and they finally caught the arsonist, and I wrote up a piece on it, and my editor asked well, were they homeless? And I said, well, if they were home full, would we include that in the story? It's not. What does that have to do with really anything? The
Right.
crime is arson. Arson is a crime already, right? And I do really think we need to push back on folks when they come forward with stuff like this. One other thing here, can I ask what is going on? These are two outgoing city council members, correct? Angelique is running for the state senate against Dave Jones. Dave Jones is the progressive candidate. By the way, this is District 8. He recently got Planned Parenthood's endorsement. Go Dave.
Go Dave.
Angelique is going running to his right, even though she's sort of shrouding herself in this like veil of like, oh, I'm progressive, right? And then Jeff Harris has been drawn out of his district, so he will not be running again for his seat this year. So these are two outgoing council members holding this press conference. What's going on here?
So everything that I'm hearing, Angelique is like 15 points behind Dave. You know, it would not surprise me if she's trying to set herself up to run for mayor next. Jeff is on his way out. I'm pretty excited that come December, neither of these folks will be representing the people of Sacramento. Knock on wood. But, you know, this is Jeff's district, and Angelique Ashby was holding a press conference in it. So I'd have to say that this is probably has to do with her trying to get her name in the paper, trying to look like she's doing something about homelessness when she's had, you know, how many terms, 8 years now to do something about homelessness and hasn't really come up with solutions at the scale of the problem. And, you know, trying to get that last hurrah in. It's also telling that if you look at the picture from the Sacramento Bee, the two people that are on stage to either side of Karina Talamantes, candidate for council district, the new council district 3, are two of the people leading the recall against Katie Valenzuela.
Right. There's a man in a blue shirt. His name is Nick Koufasimis. And if anyone has ever been out there during kind of anything regarding homelessness in these, okay, so we've got these far right folks that are just horrible people that have been pushing Katie Valenzuela, District 4's council member, my council member. They've been pushing her recall, which was failed. It had failed last month, I believe. It's a bunch of these terrible people up in East Sac. McKinley Village is a big focus there. And then also some folks down in Land Park. So it's like the richest areas surrounding District 4. One of these folks is Nick, who's in this picture. Very, very aggressive, angry man. And then I believe
Christina Rogers
of the Land Park. What is it? Like, she's like neighborhood community, something like
CA
that.
Community Association. And she's the one that's been organizing these quote unquote crime protests. There was one at out in front, I believe it was the Tower Theater, the corner of like 16th and Broadway.
Mm-hmm. They
were out there when the Starbucks closed, and they were met with, you know, some counter protesters.
This is some hilarious far right stuff too, because the Starbucks closed. The employees are saying it closed because they were planning to organize, but the Starbucks gets to claim that like, oh, well, there's crime in the area. And all the employees were like, there's been no difference in crime. Not only that, the last 2 years, you look at crime on the Broadway corridor, it is 100% unchanged.
Yep.
Yeah.
But you were saying they were met by some counter protesters. A lot of folks we know actually, who I think pretty soundly let them know that they can't do this harmful stuff. They can't do this sort of smearing of our most vulnerable population without pushback, without people coming out and saying like, this is fascist activity you're doing, and we're not going to allow you to film folks at their lowest without you feeling what like a community that shuns that should feel like.
Yeah. This whole thing just really bothers me. And it bothers me because I feel like, you know, this is another example of Angelique Ashby instead, like really trying to champion the cause of whiteness. I just got to call that out. Because I have never seen her this concerned about anything that affects Black children in this way, right? Like, even when the mayor put out his call for everybody to identify some shelter spaces in her area, she never did. And she never took that on, despite the fact that, you know, Black and Indigenous folks are the most represented in folks experiencing homelessness, and that they have children who also experience homelessness. And so I would just like to see the same concern sometime for Angelique to show up and, you know, and not just protect the most privileged class. And it's frustrating to me that she very predictably takes from this page of like bad white feminist practices, and that so many people line up behind her because she just like says, I am a woman. I mean, it almost reminds me of Lois from Family Guy, where she was running for office and she just kept saying 9/11 and getting applause. Like, that's kind of what Angelique does. She just like, I am a woman, and people go, and we need more women, and people go, and I'm like, how, like, I would take somebody other than her who's going to be good on these issues anytime. And, you know, her showing up in East Sac to be able to make this point about we need to care about the best interests of kids. And I'm like, whose kids? What kids? Why do you only care about these kids? And also, because we have the space to say it, it also really bothers me, this whole idea of, it feels like protecting privileged childhood. Like, low-income kids, Black kids have to face racism, have to understand classism, have to deal with the realities of the world. And we're taking a bunch of housed children and saying they shouldn't have to see what we're doing here. And I think that that's damaging for two reasons. Number one, I think it opens up a conversation for us about what we are and are not doing. And children who are experiencing this don't get to be sheltered from it. And you're not advocating for that. So why are we suddenly advocating for it here? I think there's some real questions. It's giving me critical race theory vibes. I think the other piece of it is that we are not, I mean, I think we need to be really clear about, we're not actually committed to addressing this as a challenge. We just want some people to feel protected from it. And I think that raises an entire generation then of people who view this as a challenge that is more cosmetic than substantive. I think it allows them to have distance from it. And I think it allows them to center themselves in a conversation that frankly isn't about them. And so that's not to take anything away from the child or children who were exposed to this person committing a crime, but that person's housing status is not what caused the crime. And that person's housing status is now maligning other people who have not committed a crime and causing them to potentially be displaced. And that's not okay in any way.
It's collective punishment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have a hard time feeling that Jeff Harris actually cares about any of this, since he is the face of the No on L campaign.
Yes.
Tomorrow, or rather last night for listeners, yesterday for listeners, Jeff Harris is going to be back in the same location debating Councilmember Schenirer over Measure L, which for folks who don't know is the second version of the measure that will lockbox some cannabis money for children's programs. This is the second time Jeff's been against this. And, out of one side of his mouth, he's saying how much he's concerned about kids. And on the other side is like, we got to make sure those kids don't get funding for their programs. It's wild. And both of these council members voted to close, or rather to sell off the Marshall and the Jade to SRO hotels where sex offenders live for boutique hotels. So now there's, dozens of people who once had housing and who were sex offenders who are now on the street, who didn't find housing, even though they, were promised $2,600. It's so disingenuous for them to come out and do this when everything in their background says, they don't actually care about this. I think it's just a political stunt, to be honest. Like,
it is. I mean, it's basically, it's the red blood justice of your Clinton era Democrats. It's, we want to help our upper middle class and our petite bourgeois to keep the negative effects of capitalism and what it does to us out of their neighborhoods. And if we do that, then our voters will be happy. But that's not going to fly these days. I just don't think it will the way it used to 20, 30 years ago, because it is everywhere. We all have to face it. And what Flo talks about all the time, I guess what we all do, is that, do we want to really deal with these problems? Do we want to address them? Well, then we have to determine what those determinants are that put us in this position and deal with that, and not just criminalize every little behavior that our lower classes do. Like, that will not solve the problem.
Exactly. And I just want to point out, again, the talking out of both sides of your mouth. So, Jeff Harris has been against this both when it came up as Measure G and now that it's up as Measure L. And when we look at the demographics of who voted for Measure G, which was the kids fund that was on the ballot in March of 2020, what we see is a tale of two cities. And Youth Forward put out a report on this, that overwhelmingly lower income communities and communities that had more people of color voted 2-1 to have the children's fund. And overwhelmingly, our predominantly white and more affluent communities voted 2-1 not to have the children's fund. So, here we are talking about something that's going to predominantly, impact kids who need it. And our affluent communities that can afford to buy things and support their kids on their own are saying, leave those kids unprotected. But the moment that they have to deal with a crime, one, at their school now or near their school, now it's, we have to do something about this widespread problem, but not something substantive, not something that actually addresses a human rights need and makes, a deep and seemingly intractable issues one that we can handle, something that just makes them more comfortable. And
Yeah.
I'm tired of privileging and centering the comfort of people who are already the most comfortable in our society, and not thinking about the comfort and the basic needs of people who we have repeatedly kicked in the teeth.
Shannon has a great quote, our co-host in this article, saying, in the same way that young children deserve safe walking paths to and from school, unhoused people are deserving of safe spaces to sleep.
And to that, I snap to Shannon.
Yep. So the camps that this 500-foot prohibition would affect right there by Sutter Middle School are the folks who are sleeping under that G Street overpass. So they're staying out of the sun and the rain in the shade, right? And then there's a camp on the on-ramp there a couple blocks away. 400 or 500 feet is about one Sacramento City block downtown, plus the road in between, right? So they want everybody to move back essentially a block. Shade and cover from the rain. Those are survival needs, right? If you get wet outside, even in a 60-degree evening, if you get wet outside, you can die of hypothermia.
Right.
That can happen. Sacramento sun is no joke. We just went through some of the hottest days in Sacramento's history. You do not want to be, camped outside of the shade in that time. Everyone wishes that we had a place, a housing, right, for folks. Well, I shouldn't say everyone. The people that I roll with, everyone wants everyone to have a house, right? I don't know if that's everyone else's goal, but that is, as places go to have shelter, like that G Street overpass, that's a good place to survive. And we have no place for those folks to go if we tell them they have to leave.
And the people who want them out have no solutions for them.
Yes. And let's just be really clear. When it was 115 degrees and Smud said, can you set your thermostats to 78? Some of you all acted like you had been dropped off in the middle of the Sahara and couldn't handle it. So let's just be honest about what the conditions actually mean and how accustomed many of us are to being in temperature controlled places. And we are unable to handle it for the very brief periods of time where we're forced to be outside in those conditions. And then consider if you almost never got an opportunity to be able to shelter yourself from that.
Yeah, absolutely. So
there's another component I wanted to bring up here. And it's a toughie. Karina Talamantes is shoulder to shoulder in these pictures with, two people who are leading the now failed recall against Katie Valenzuela.
Yep.
And I mean, as somebody who's been a chief of staff, I was never in the pictures. I didn't try to get in the pictures. And I know Karina is running for office, but
So she's got to, yeah. Or you'd expect her to.
Well, depending on what capacity she's there.
Right. So is she there as a chief of staff or as a potential council member?
I don't know.
Yeah.
It doesn't bode well that the candidate in that race, who has been described as being better on housing, has taken this side, especially given everybody's concerns, right? Like, there's been the conversation about her versus Michael Lynch in District 3, and, Michael having cozied up to a lot of the developers and, taken some of the building industry money and that sort of thing, and the concerns around that, given that housing and homelessness is, even though the council can't establish any priorities, so that section of the budget is still empty. But I think we know that it's somewhere on most people's radar as a challenge. Now, whether or not they have productive answers to it is another side. But the idea, so that's been one of the criticisms of him, and one of the talking points about her is that she has a much stronger commitment supposedly to affordable housing and to addressing homelessness. And then when you pull a move like this with essentially two lame duck, city council members, and standing, shoulder to shoulder with the people who were trying to oust one of your, potential colleagues, a potential colleague who is supporting your campaign, like that's really
who's walking and knocking for you on the weekends. That's pretty hard to swallow.
And I was like, I know it's no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, and like you sometimes end up on the same side of a fight for whatever reason. But I would question, is this the fight that you really need to be on the same side with anybody up there on? Like, you're supposed to be the good housing person, Karina. I'm deeply confused.
Yeah, but that's been her problem, I think, throughout her campaign. It's like she has not picked a lane. And this isn't like even saying this as like a lefty, like, wow, support our issues. I know business leaders that are saying the same thing about her because they want her to pick a lane. Because when she tries to please everyone, she's going to please no one.
She's going to be Daryl Steinberg Jr.
Yeah. But like Michael Lynch has picked his lane and she hasn't. And that's going to be a problem for her.
Yeah.
In the past, she has taken some stands that she didn't have to take. She came out, in support of rent control when she didn't have to. Mm-hmm. She's done things that make me think like she believes it, right? But then like when I see a picture like that, and maybe she didn't know who those people were, or maybe like she just wanted to be in the picture because she's running for office, or I don't know, but it was kind of heartbreaking to see her up there.
It's certainly not inspiring any progressive to go knock on doors for her, which is, I think, could be really helpful for her right now.
Yeah.
So I gotta move on to the next topic, if that's all right with everyone. But just to say, they should be voting on this as early as I think it would be October 11th, probably the first city council meeting back. Mm-hmm. It looks like it probably would pass because we have a conservative city council. Valenzuela, possibly Mai Vang, might vote against it, knowing that this will solve absolutely nothing, and what we need to do is actually address the determinants of homelessness. But even the mayor in this article said that
they already got 3 votes, and Sean will do whatever Angelique tells him to do. So there's your 4th vote, and Rick probably isn't going to oppose this. So
it's just cowardly. This mayor claims to be this empathetic person to unhoused folks, and it's like, why then? Like this is just responding to people's very cheap political game, like oh, think of the children. It's like this wouldn't change anything.
And this is just also just a misuse as a person who like really thinks about how we define things. This is a misuse of infrastructure. Okay. And I'm really kind of tired of the words critical infrastructure being looped together and being used as an excuse to be able to do horrifying things, because I think there should be a real definition there of like, name for me in specific language what the threat is to the critical infrastructure.
Right.
And also define for me why this is critical infrastructure, because it's a critical institution. But I can't, again, logic model. I don't understand. Is the camp somehow deteriorating the side of the building? Is it affecting the what? Like, help me understand what the threat is.
Exactly. I mean, if they use that language, like, sounds like they're opening themselves up to a suit. Yeah. But yeah, let's move on to our next topic. There has been a bit of a spate of shootings here in Sacramento. So we wanted to discuss that a little bit. The SACB did a pretty comprehensive piece on this. It was by Rosalia Ahumada. Obviously, I think many people had heard about a shooting that happened in Midtown around J and 28th Streets. I think it was outside Bar West. I believe this resulted in one person dying. Directly after this happened, all of these very conservative Democrats started coming out attacking Councilmember Valenzuela. This is in her district, right? Saying like, look at this deteriorating Midtown. This is all Katie Valenzuela's fault. It's coming from, of course, the same folks that tried to recall her. It's coming from the same folks that are doing this sort of bait and switch, like, oh, we're just trying to stop crime, and they're actually just using that as a reason to terrorize unhoused folks. Now they're using a shooting for political purposes against Valenzuela. Another very high profile person doing this would be America's Landlord, Steve Maviglio, biggest piece of shit in the city. So he came out, I don't know if you saw what he said, but he referred to the shooting, and then he mentioned what he called Katie Valenzuela's jihad against funding the police. Which is a very blatant
bingo.
Wow.
I got bingo. That's my ridiculous statement. Bingo. I had trifecta of racism somewhere where like people end up like somehow or another Muslims get maligned in this process, and like it. Yeah, bingo. I got bingo.
Yeah. Well, Flo wins this week. Maviglio. Yeah, so full on xenophobia, full on Islamophobia, full on just racism against a young elected. Because over the next couple days, there were other shootings in other places in the city. And weirdly, Steve and his ilk have been quieter when it's in the district of older men. So there was one shooting up on, where were these other ones? San Juan Avenue and Acevedo Drive. Whose district is that?
That's Harris.
That's Jeff Harris. Oh, but he's friends with Steve, so why would Steve go after him, right?
Right.
Another one was in Strawberry Manor. That would be Sean Loloee.
Yep.
Okay. And then there was another one in Oak Park, which was probably either
that's Jay Schenirer. Yep.
Jay Scheniner's district. They don't get the brunt of these attacks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it should be abundantly clear to everybody what these folks are doing here, right? Do we want shootings in our city? Obviously not. Should they be using that for political football? Yeah. Definitely fucking not.
Yeah, Katie somehow, Katie is so magical. She invented homelessness and gun violence.
Yeah.
That's what essentially their argument, right? So Bar West has been a problem for months, and it's probably worth a PRA. There have been so many complaints. There has been a lot of there's been some gun violence there. There's been a lot of fights there. The police is like night problem oriented folks have been out there quite a bit. And the folks at Bar West, unfortunately, aren't really good at managing a crowd.
Mhm.
And this keeps happening
It
at their
pulls a
location.
weird type of dude too. Like I've always called it Bro West. If you go there and watch UFC fights with a woman, she will get groped. Like that has been my experience at that bar.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm not a fan of it. And like when I hear about fights and stuff happening there, I'm in no way surprised.
Yeah. When I was still at the city, there was active conversation about that bar, being fined and having other consequences for want of being able to control the folks that are at their bar.
Sure.
Yeah.
And maybe
I just think it's interesting that we haven't actually had a conversation about the role of, alcohol in in some of this, right? Like we're quick to malign the entire population of homelessness, but we also know that fights are more likely to break out when people are intoxicated, right? And nobody is, trying to get rid of someone's ABC license because fights break out. So just wanted to add that in. I'm not advocating for making, for prohibition. I'm just simply pointing out how we don't apply the same lens to, critical issues in this way where we malign something that is seen to be associated.
Right. Yeah. And we concentrate a lot of our alcohol-based entertainment establishments in District 4, right there downtown. Yep. So that's
the nightlife district. Yeah.
Yep.
Which often downtowns are in any city.
Yes. Yes.
So, to me, it just seems
but
like
Katie invented that too. She created downtown.
Right. Violence is violence. And like, obviously we want less of it in a particular city. But yeah. So can we talk a little bit about sort of this article here? They mentioned that the new fatalities, there have been 5 people shot dead in 4 shootings over the course of 3 days. That brings the death toll to this year to 45, on pace to surpass last year's 57 homicides. That's the most since 2006. Now, I'm confused because we've funded our police at unprecedented levels this year, to the highest we've ever funded them, and yet we're still having gun violence. I thought police were going to stop that. We have the most heavily armed, the most it's effectively a police force that's an army. Why are they not stopping all these shootings?
I would have to say because it's police's job to respond to crime and not to prevent crime.
Oh,
that would be my guess. One of my favorite quotes from this, or I don't know if it's a quote exactly, was that Kathy Lester said that community groups do a better job. Yes, do a better job at intervention work than law enforcement. And I think that's really important. And I'm glad that Chief Lester acknowledges that, because the city of Sacramento in the past has worked with many community groups who have deep relationships in the neighborhoods and with the youth. And, we've had years in Sacramento where there have been 0 youth on youth homicides, none, absolutely none, 0. And then we stopped funding those programs for, I don't know, I guess it got better, so we don't have to do that anymore. And, we had this conversation when there was the shooting in Old Sacramento, I believe last summer. And that shooting happened right in front of, like 15 feet in front of police officers. The presence of police officers at the location did not stop the shooting.
No,
right.
This all happened. Like the work of ending this kind of gun violence happens way before people have guns and they're at a bar or in Old Sac, right? And this is why prevention is so important. It's why we should be funding prevention programs instead of giving more money to law enforcement. I think we're at 6% now. The city of Sacramento solves 6% of the crime, roughly, that comes before it. And if I only was successful at 6% of my job, then I would be fired. But yeah, I know it's more complicated than that. I know they do other work besides that.
I know,
but
it is kind of funny.
It is. It's hard, especially when the chief of police recognizes that it's community centered and led interventions and not police intervention that's going to fix this.
Yep.
Can we?
Yeah.
Are there? Maybe both of you could speak to this, or our dear friend Ryan, who is Flo's colleague and friend of the show. Are there city council members that have fought to defund these community programs?
Oh, absolutely.
Which
Like
ones?
the ones we talk about all the time on this show. You know, the challenge here is that these programs are usually the ones that are, you know, in place and are establishing relationships to be able to do the critical work. It's not the police department, which is why many of the advocates were really angry when the Office of Violence Prevention was moved under the police department, because it's simply not the way to go. And as much
That's very weird.
Yeah, as much
Yes.
as Chief Lester tried to like describe this in, you know, the article as like, we're staying out of it and we're letting our partners because this isn't an enforcement issue, blah, blah, blah. The bottom line becomes to do true prevention, the police don't have a role in that.
They should not. Never.
That's not their lane. And
people don't trust them in these communities. These communities, and Lester in this article is outlining that she is pinpointing neighborhoods that need to her view, an increased police presence. That's Flo, you've talked about this before. That's like occupation effectively.
Absolutely.
What neighborhoods are these?
And you know what came up for me is that there is an initiative in the Bay Area that I was a lot more familiar with when I was doing more maternal, child, and adolescent health work. It's called the Best Baby Zone. And it's like this 10 to 13 block radius where the Alameda County Department of Public Health, and with some additional funding, and UC Berkeley and several other folks, you know, kind of came together with community members, and they were like, this is where we have a really high infant mortality rate. We are going to, and we understand infant mortality is not just a prenatal care thing. It's like all of the things that are happening in the community. So we are going to come together and we are going to significantly invest in this 13 block zone and really focus on it, not from a law enforcement perspective, but from a community investment perspective. And so when I was reading about, you know, these zones where I was like, this is a key place where we should be thinking about what can we invest in that has nothing to do with the police. Like, keep them out of it. You've done your part now. You've identified the problem, go home, have a snack, and leave the real work up to everybody else, because those are the places where there's something that's needed there. You're talking about people who've experienced a lot of trauma, which we know is a risk factor for being caught, you know, involved in more violence in the future. We know we understand the conditions here. So all you had to do was highlight for us where, and you've triangulated that well. Now get out of the way and let the people who can really do the preventive work do it. And I think my biggest frustration is that communities are saying we want certain things, and these are things that have been proven in other places in the country or the world to work and to achieve the outcome. And people say, but not that, right? Don't take away our guns because that's a problem. Don't do this because that's a problem. We don't want to invest money in this way because it's a problem. We don't want to divert part of the police budget because it's a problem. We don't want, and it's like, so all the things we know that work, you're not going to invest in. And then we're going to be stuck with the same old thing. And then you're going to be beating your heads up against the wall and saying, well, the police obviously need more money. How many times are we going to go through this?
Can I get you to name names who's tried to defund these community programs?
Angelique Ashby was the first one. She didn't want Advanced Peace to come to the city of Sacramento. She played, you know, her game of just trying to name drop other Black people in hopes that they were going to be politically ambitious enough to say, oh yeah, I should be getting this money because I'm homegrown. And it was like people who weren't even involved in this. You know, lots of people have that experience with her of her doing that. You know, at the time, Jeff Harris was also significantly against doing this kind of thing. He's always trying to, I mean, he's against the children's fund. He's always trying to vote against, what we need here. Interestingly enough, on this, Rick Jennings was one of the champions on the council, who was saying, like, we really need to make these investments. At the same time, and I don't know if this is political trait, but he also was like, yeah, sure, give the more money to the police. Like, so it's like one pot of money. We need to understand that. And he couldn't quite get around that. Larry Carr was not supportive of this when he was on the council. I mean, like,
former District 8 council member.
Like, we have to be honest about where people sat when these votes were happening and what positions they took and continue to take.
I just want to bring that up because I want to circle the square here and tie this into our earlier discussion that, these same council members that respond to the existence of poverty and homelessness by saying we need to police it more, we need to increase police enforcement more, as opposed to dealing with it at the source, are the same ones that in response to this say we need to police it more, we need more police, we need to occupy these neighborhoods with police presence to protect our richer neighborhoods, right? That's what they're always doing, rather than address violence at its source. It's the same people, and they've been in power for decades and decades, and it's getting worse and worse. And like, I just want to make that connection for folks who haven't already made that.
When there was the shooting at K Street, terrible shooting. Katie Valenzuela, Councilmember Katie Valenzuela, fought hard for funding for those community intervention programs, and it was like pulling teeth, trying to get City Manager Howard Chan to take her seriously. And even after there were commitments, I was in a lot of rooms with community leaders in the days that followed that shooting, and the mayor, to his credit, was like, absolutely, we need to fund these programs. But when like the rubber hit the road and we needed to pry the money out of Howard, like, that's when it got a little sketchy. And, we weren't sure that we were going to get it.
So it's the city manager pumping the brakes in a lot of this.
Yeah, but it takes 5 votes, right? It takes 5 votes to not fund or to unfund, these community programs, or to divert those dollars to some other issue area. Yeah, it's never one person.
Yeah.
And I would say one of the things that might help with that would be if the city council would establish some priorities. That is my campaign right now. I am going to stay on it because I
she's running.
Really important. No, I'm just campaigning. my policy campaign right now is to live in a city that has some freaking priorities. Join me.
That's it. Give them a vision flow, something positive. We're gonna have a great campaign someday. So
we have a campaign right now, and it's council establishing priorities. Page 30, whatever in the budget should not be blank.
I dig that. Oh, yeah, by the way, just a reminder to folks that another, thinly veiled enforcement initiative that's coming forward to us is Measure O, which will increase enforcement against our unhoused neighbors and will potentially bankrupt the city. They're going to be putting $5 million a year and more if this passes to sweeping folks, to enforcement, to lawsuits that the rich folks will be able to put against the city. And that could cost millions and millions of dollars. And that's just creating a city that doesn't work for you and does work for the richer folks. Yeah. And we don't want that. So vote no on O, help us with that, noono.net. And yeah, just reach out to us because I think all of us are working together on that one right now.
Yes, we are.
Anything
Got
else?
A great write-up in the San Francisco Chronicle. Raheem, bless him, telling the truth about Measure O. That was really exciting. Go Google that, folks.
Yeah, and I forgot the name of the reporter he worked with too. Raheem is the editor, but he's a former Sacramento resident, so he knows this stuff front to back.
Yep.
Another fantastic piece in the Sacramento Observer by one Dr. Flojan Kofer.
I hear she's got a future in politics.
I do too. If she's behind an initiative, I'm with her. Great piece, sort of outlining everything that is wrong with Measure O.
And thanks to Dave's enormous help, as well as my comms team at Public Health Advocates for really making that piece what it was.
That thing sang.
We are better together.
Yeah, but it's a big fight, and they've got these rich motherfuckers have a lot of money behind them trying to pass this thing. What we have behind us is grassroots community power. Our messaging works because we're fucking right. So that's huge. That is not a challenge for us. Our message is correct. Our challenge is reaching everyone. We have to reach everyone in this city who's going to be a voter. We got to get it across that threshold in the next month and a half. I think we can do it. But please, if you want to be a part of that, reach out to us and let us know. We'll fit you in and we'll make this work.
Yep.
I guess we're around the end of the show.
We are.
How weird. We recorded today at 12:30 p.m. For a number of reasons. One, because a lot of folks are hoping to go support Councilmember Valenzuela out in East Sac in her debate against Daniel Conway, who is behind Measure O. There's also the great civil rights attorney Mark Marin will be debating Amanda Blackwood of the Metro Chamber in front of the League of Women Voters. Good news there. They already came down on our side. They are against Measure O, the League of Women Voters. But that's going to be a really interesting debate as well. I'm not sure if that's going to be streamed or anything. But there's a lot going on in this Measure O fight. So that's all happening. Anyway, we had to record early. That's what I'm saying. Last time we recorded this early, Flo, you weren't on the show. It was the morning after you dressed down the mayor at the Measure U committee.
That's hilarious.
we were going to record it the night before, but your meeting went so late, and then you did an 8-minute rant at him that ended up in all the headlines in the region. We were like, oh God, okay, well, I'm flying home from Colorado and let's record in the morning, which is what we did.
It's when I knew I loved you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really excited about Measure O, our opposition team. I just want to say how awesome it is. Along with League of Women Voters in opposition, there's public health advocates, Organized Sacramento area congregations together. So people of faith are on our side. The Sacramento Central Labor Council, the Democratic Party of Sacramento County, a bunch of Dem clubs, the Sacramento Housing Alliance, and all of the folks
the
who work
ACLU,
right? The folks who work with people experiencing homelessness every day. Crystal Sanchez is with us. There's just it's such an extraordinary group of community people, right? I don't know how. It's my hope that when voters start to see like who's opposed to this, who's pushing it, when you've got the chamber and PBIDs and the Sacramento Kings, right? Very moneyed interests. It is a real David and Goliath story, because so far they have, I think, about $280,000 have come into their campaign account, and they can essentially print money, right? They're the Kings and the chamber.
Every day, 10,000 more here.
And let's just talk about the fact that the Kings have already received so much of our city resources that we could actually address homelessness if we weren't paying for their freaking arena in like some corporate welfare nonsense. So let's just name that, right?
So one of the first campaigns I worked on in the city was for a community benefits agreement for the arena. And in that CBA was requested housing, because we were going to rebuild the center of the city, and exactly what we thought did happen. Rents started to skyrocket, but we gave, hundreds of millions, $240 million to the Kings.
Yep.
That would have built a lot of housing.
Yeah.
It's
So
so
I'm tired
silly.
of that too. And I'm not saying that sports are not like important. Like I'm not
They're
saying any
fun.
of that.
It's good
They're
fun.
fun. It's nice to be able to have them. I was a season ticket holder for 10 years. Like I get it. I'm also saying that's not where the money should go. And they, to turn around and then say we don't want and we're going to be part of the problem is just irresponsible on the part of the Kings. So shame on you, Vivek. Shame on you, everybody who was responsible for that decision. That's terrible.
We need to nationalize the Kings. It needs to be a community-owned sports team.
Yep.
And then everyone will be behind that. But no, I mean, it's so silly. And we have these conversations, especially I love having you two as hosts, because it's like you give the 5,000-foot view of like, this caused this problem. The same politicians who agreed to this are fighting against everything that would actually solve our problems.
Yep.
And it's so crystal clear when you two get to speak to it. So thank you for that. I got to wrap it up. So
Yes.
just a reminder to folks, you can find all of our stuff at voicesrivercity.com. We're on all the socials, of course, all the podcast platforms. We're on YouTube. You can look at our pretty little faces as we educate you on the news of the day. You can also buy, I don't know, a White Claw koozie. You can buy a t-shirt. You can get stickers from us. And we're going to add some other stuff we're hoping soon. Sorry, Skylar, for that promise when I don't even have a date or what those are.
Soon is not a broken promise.
Okay, it's voicesrivercity.com/shop to find out what we got for sale there. But I believe that's it. Let's all wrap this up and let's go crush Measure O.
Hoot.
All right, bye everyone.
Bye.